And what is going on, guys? And welcome back to the Pick Swap podcast. A little bit different today, a little change up, but I got my guy Mark Henry Jr. You know him from me and him on the Tough Cover Radio show on Saturday mornings on Fox Sports The Gambler. Also does a ton of draft breakdown, Eagles content, and everything else in the sports betting and sports world in general. So, Mark, I'll just start out with how are we doing today?
Doing well. I'm in Texas, traveling for work, but man, all that's on my mind is Sixers basketball and just what's going on right now with the Bucks. I mean, I can't think about anything but Doc Rivers and Joel Embiid right now. That's all I'm thinking about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I did want to make sure that we jumped on and talked about all this. So an absolutely incredible performance from Joel Embiid last night. A historic one that will go down in the record books forever. The 70-point performance, something that I, to be honest, not sure I would ever be able to witness from any player ever. And to see Joel do it in that capacity was so cool to me. So I want to start off just diving in on that, and then of course touch on the Doc Rivers side of things. The Bucks firing Adrian Griffin, looking the direction of Doc Rivers, and how this implicates the Sixers and impacts them moving forward. But to start off with, dive in on Joel's performance as a whole. I want to begin by just starting off kind of your mindset for that game. Very clear that he was in attack mode from the opening tip. That 34 points in the first half. I think it was 24 in the first quarter alone. Cool to see him go out Wemby, and also kind of funny that when you think back to the Victor Wembanyama conversations of people questioning like how is he going to guard guys like Joel Embiid, and Joel giving him 70. So pretty funny there. But what was kind of your thoughts on the opening minutes of that game, and did you see Joel in attack mode in a different way last night?
Yeah, it definitely seemed like Joel wanted to kind of, show the young kid what the league was all about a little bit, wanted to dunk him through the rim. Maybe he heard Popovich talk about, hammer him in the press conference before the game. But yeah, he looked absolutely determined from, possession one to go and do something special. And obviously was it the anniversary of Kobe's 81 or the day after? Yeah, the anniversary. It's hard not to think maybe that, or maybe not right away, but 20 points, in the first, I think it was like 10 minutes, probably started crossing his head right then and there. And to be honest, like it could have been 81. Like it really could have been more. Like he could have taken more threes. Daniel House, someone needs to tell him someone needs to get this guy's awareness. Man. Seriously, he should have like 25 awareness in 2K. Like have a little bit of awareness of what is going on. Your teammates are clearly trying to get Joel to a milestone, and he's just head down to the rim, taking threes, dunking. I mean, Daniel House, he did not give. He didn't care at all about what was going on around him.
And so funny when the whole crowd booing him after attempting that three. That was hilarious right there. But yeah, Joel Embiid was the whole story for that one. And this really is like, I don't think it's being appreciated on the national scale or even some of the local scale for how great this season truly is. That just to throw out some of these stats, like this is the same guy that won MVP last year and is averaging more points, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks in fewer minutes per game. He has the most points per minute and the most points per 36 minutes of any player in NBA history this season. That these numbers are beating Wilt Chamberlain. These are things, the only player in NBA history to score 70 points, have 15 rebounds, and 5 assists ever in a game, and one of 9 players to score 70 points, period. Like, this is historic stuff right in front of our very eyes. I think this is the greatest stretch of basketball, and this individual season is the most impressive scoring output of any player in NBA history. And I want to get your thoughts on that, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, it's not ridiculous. It's definitely not a ridiculous thing to bring up. There's, a couple. I just eliminate Wilt Chamberlain from these discussions. That was a different league. When I generally talk all time, I talk post ABA merger. So I'm mid 70s is usually the breaking point of when I'm saying all time. I don't really want to think about Wilt and Bill Russell and Oscar, but in that stretch, there's obviously a couple ones you could point to. You could point to Jordan, his best year in the mid 90s or maybe early 90s where he averaged 36. You could point to James Harden. And that's probably the other one that I think is in the conversation with this Joel one. Now, the interesting conversation that there is to have, and, I'm not analytically driven, and I shouldn't say that. I am analytically driven, but I'm not analytically driven enough to find the exact stats on. So scoring is up about 10% from the late 2000s, kind of LeBron's era, I'd say. So if you apply a 10% increase to LeBron's best year of like 31-8-7 or 38-7, whatever it was, is that probably like 35-10-8? Probably, maybe, and that would probably be better. But I mean, that's that's playing semantics.
Nitpicking. Yeah,
You're
yeah.
playing semantics and nitpicking. So if you just look at the line, it's the most impressive stat line we've ever seen in modern basketball. And the reason we're taking it for granted is because he won the MVP last year, and he had a year last year that no one thought anyone, and no one thought he could ever replicate. If
Yeah.
anything, we were talking in the offseason about maybe he shoots a little less, maybe he's less of an MVP candidate, maybe he thinks less about that stuff, maybe he focuses more on the defensive end or focuses more on passing ball, which he's done both of, but
Yeah.
he's also been an even better scorer. It's really unfathomable how good this guy is. He's very clearly the best player in the league right now. And that's amazing to say, especially, where we were in May.
Yeah. And absolutely. And one of the things like it's interesting with the Wilt comparisons, which obviously like it's a different ballgame with a lot of this. One of the things that's interesting with that, like you look at the stats and numbers from that, the season that he had these ridiculous numbers, he played 48.5 minutes per game,
Yep.
which that's a far more unbreakable record than the 100-point game in my mind. We'll never see a
Yeah.
player average anything like that. And that's just kind of with the times, with the injuries, ridiculous that he did it, no doubt about it. But like when you factor in Joel scoring these numbers on 12 fewer minutes per game, that's absurd stuff, or 14 fewer minutes per game. That's ridiculous things. And the MVP conversation for this specific year's injury that we are interesting, that we know that they put down the 65 game just set standard that has kind of always loosely been a thing. I know the first Joel Embiid MVP runner up moment that games played was held against him pretty strongly, and that was a major selling point for Jokic winning that one. I kind of appreciate that it's at least in writing and that there is a set standard rather than being so up for interpretation. But I'm kind of curious that we know he can miss 7 more games this season. Do you think it's important enough for him to go for this? Because I've kind of switched my tune. I was initially like, I don't care. He got it. I want him to win this award, Mark.
My take on this. We've argued a little bit about this before. I don't
Yeah.
care at all about the MVP. I cared last year, and when it became an Embiid Jokic issue, you know how I feel about that. And regardless of what happened in the playoffs, I still feel the same way. So that kind of added to me really caring about that last year. He hadn't won one yet. He very clearly cared about it. I care about his legacy. At this point, do I really think a second MVP, is really that important? Not really. Like, I think if he ended his career with 1 MVP and 8 All NBAs or 2 MVP and 8 All NBAs or whatever that is, I don't think it's really going to make too big of an impact on his all-time standing. But I just don't see the upside of him playing back-to-backs. He's been doing it the last week or two. And, the answer back to that is, oh, well, it keeps him in better shape, and that'll actually help him stay healthy. He seems to get hurt more when we're sitting him more. I think that's anecdotal. I think that's something that if he got hurt playing in a back-to-back in a month from now, we wouldn't be saying that anymore.
Right.
So I just, all that matters to me is the Larry O'Brien. All that matters to me is getting Joel the actual thing that matters to his legacy at this point. And I think this is our best. I mean, broken record, but how many years in a row am I going to say this is our best chance to do it? It feels like it right now.
Mm-hmm.
Even with all the uncertainty, it really feels like they have a legitimate chance. And honestly, if they were where I thought they'd be this year, which was like the 3 or 4 seed, but very clearly not on Boston and Milwaukee's level and not a real contender, then yeah, go get the MVP, play them back-to-backs. I don't care. But it's very clear that everything that we could possibly want for this team is right there. It's possible. And that's kind of all I'm focused on.
Yeah. So to dig into that a little more, I'm kind of curious your mindset. For me, and we're going to dive a little deeper into the Bucks specifically things, but for me, the Celtics are by far kind of the number one in the East. That's the gold standard that the Sixers should be looking at as a measuring stick. What do you see as the gap between the Celtics and the Sixers at this very moment? Might have lost Mark there.
I lost you there for a second. I'm right back. I don't know what happened there.
You're good. But so what would you say the difference between the Celtics and the Sixers is at this very moment as the rosters are?
It's the depth through starters like 3 through 5. That's the issue. I mean, obviously, I think you could make an argument that Joel and Maxey are first and maybe the third best player on those two teams. I mean, it's right? Maxey or Jaylen Brown at this point is a conversation, at least, I think.
Derek White's in the hunt. somehow too.
Derek White's really good. I do think he gets over. I do think he's in like a perfect situation for him
No
where
doubt.
he's got Tatum and Brown around him. He's got Kristaps. He doesn't have to be relied on to be a volume scorer. Like he can really just settle into like a perfect diet of shots. Like I think he's a really good player. But but what I'm saying is like guys like him are the difference. Like
Yeah.
to when you're talking about Tobias and Oubre and D'Anthony Melton and Nick Batum as those next four guys, love some of them, not trying to put them down. But when that compares to Kristaps and Derek White, it becomes a tougher road to hoe a little bit. But there's ways to fix that. I mean,
Yeah.
there's ways to get a better third player, maybe even a better third or fourth player. We'll see if Daryl pulls the trigger. It's hard for me to sit here and say that they're so far ahead, even if the Sixers don't make a move, they have no chance, because there are different pieces on this Sixers team and different pieces on this Celtics team from last year. But the Sixers had the Celtics up against the ropes with Joel Embiid playing pretty, poorly for him in that series. You had Doc Rivers coaching that team. You have Nick Nurse coaching this team. And I know that the Celtics are better. Kristaps is huge. I think Kristaps, I said it at the time when they made the trade. I loved the trade for them. I think Kristaps is, you could even make an argument he's their second best player, maybe. He's been really, really good for them on both ends. But ultimately, it's hard for me to be too defeatist when I saw these two teams go head to head, and the Sixers almost did it despite a lot of things going against them. James Harden playing pretty poorly down the stretch of that series. Joel Embiid not playing like himself. Tobias Harris curling up into a ball as usual in the playoffs. And they still almost were able to get the job done. No one wants to hear that. No one wants to hear me talk about how they almost won last year. And I don't want to talk about it. But they are in this. It's not like Boston is some all-time great team that it's not even worth trying to compete. They're not the KD Warriors. Like they're not even the LeBron Heat. So I just think that, they're a very good team. But the Sixers can compete with them.
Yeah, I'm with you on just about all that. And the Porzingis piece, I think, is interesting because I do hate the schematic matchup that it brings. That Joel specifically is a guy who hates paying attention to big men that shoot, that he would much rather sit by the rim, be a rim protector, a guy that kind of hovers around there as a roamer. With Kristaps, he's a guy who's obviously much more comfortable stretching the floor and a very high-level shooter for his size and just in general. So I don't love the matchup that way, and that is a concern of mine. But what gives me the most optimism with the Sixers team, it's still Joel Embiid, that we've yet to see this playoff run, this burn the world on fire tour. And that is the asterisk that's always going to be on his resume. But he's the best player on either of these rosters by a pretty significant margin. That I think the gap between him and Jason Tatum has gotten much bigger than it was even last year. That when you look at this version of Joel, I thought it was pretty telling that Celtics and Nuggets matchup last week, that it was, you could see levels to it of Nikola Jokic in that same tier of Joel Embiid level player. Jason Tatum is a notch below that he is still, no doubt, an incredible talent, very good basketball player, and a phenomenal fit in the modern NBA. But there is a gap between him and with Joel specifically. And this is another reason why I keep talking about like the historic season and where he ranks across the NBA is I don't think there is another player across the entire league that's the team's most important player on both offense and defense. I think across the entire NBA, you can't pull another one. Even Giannis, who was a guy that people threw at me, Dame Lillard's the most important offensive player on that team.
Yeah.
Do you have any pushback to that one there? I saw you make
No,
a face.
no,
Yeah.
I was thinking Kawhi.
Kawhi, sure. Yeah, possibly Kawhi. I prime Kawhi, I absolutely give you. Raptors Kawhi, I absolutely give you. Although Kawhi's played phenomenal. Yeah, he's been phenomenal this year. Yeah. So yeah, that's maybe I give you that one. But like the point still being like, for a guy like Joel, and I guess my overarching point there is this is kind of one of my crucial points is I always feel that center is the most important defensive position on the floor. That when you have a guy like Joel who can clean up others' mistakes and block shots and make up for others, that's more important than a high-level wing is the defensive position in my mind. So I think that, but it just feels like that's the missing piece, that this has to be the year that it's the Joel Embiid tour come playoff time. And even when we get lost in a lot of these like trade talks, missing piece, all that, the end of the day, it comes down to Joel Embiid being Joel Embiid. And as Stan Van Gundy would love to point out, he has not done it yet.
Yeah, Sam Van would love to point it out. Yeah, that's obviously the main point, and I do expect Joel to be better in the playoffs if he's healthy. But I actually think the X factor and the difference now more than anything is Tyrese Maxey. I think Tyrese Maxey, it gives us a different kind of weapon to use around Joel, and how great he's been off of Joel. I mean, he's been the best off ball shooter in the NBA, to
Yeah.
a point where I think you might owe it to the team to figure out another guy you can get, like a DeJounte Murray, like a point guard out there, like at least a combo guard who can take the ball out of Maxey's hands and use those, skills as a weapon. How
Mm-hmm.
good he's been on catch and shoot threes is just, it's pretty unbelievable. And it's something
Yeah.
we would have never thought about with a guy like Tyrese Maxey. I mean, coming out of college, it's like, oh, hopefully he's like an average shooter because he's so good at getting to the hole. He's so fast. He's got so many of these intangible things you love. And, hopefully the shot makes it. And
Mm-hmm.
we're at a point where he is legitimately one of the very best shooters in the NBA. And
Yeah.
I think having that is just going to help Joel kind of be what he's supposed to be in the playoffs. And this is not, that, like, I still wish we had James Harden. Like, I still think James Harden could have worked on this Nick Nurse team, and I think Maxey could have grown with James Harden here. To me, I think a lot of the things we assigned to blaming Harden for were a Doc Rivers issue. But regardless of that, Tyrese Maxey has taken a leap. And Tyrese Maxey is, in my opinion, a top 20 player in the NBA and probably a top 15 to 20 scorer in the NBA. And I don't think Harden was that, at least last year. So, I mean, I can praise Harden all I want to, and I think he's doing enough of it for himself out there in LA. I think he's doing amazing. But Maxey is a far better scorer at this point in his career than James Harden was as a Sixer. So that's a pretty huge step up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do agree with your point about Doc compared to Harden, that specifically I think we're seeing the prove out in LA, that it's a testament to Ty Lue, that there is this fluidity in the offense, this movement in a way that there just was not in Philadelphia. And I think like the two-man game, as effective as it was and as statistically excellent as it was between Joel Embiid and James Harden, became so repetitive. And like James Harden is so elite at the things that he did, but so limited in what he did here in Philadelphia. And I do want to shift gears to the Doc Rivers conversation, but the quick bookmark in this is with Tyrese Maxey being the two-man partner with Joel, there's this like refreshing randomness to the offense of just different things he can do, whether it is the pick and pop, him moving off ball, pick and roll, Maxey just taking an ISO on his own. There's way more ways that they are scoring, and that is in a large way a testament to Nick Nurse. But speaking of Doc Rivers,
real quick, because I just want to touch on what you just said there, because I think it's so true. I always say this. I always bring this tweet up. You've probably heard me bring it up on the Talk Cover Radio show 4 times. Trillbro Dude came on our show. I don't know when it was. And we were asking him about potential fits. And, the one thing he said that always sticks with me is it's never been the defense in the playoffs. It's always been half-court offense. It's always been a struggle to go and get your own shot. Tyrese Maxey can do that on a far better level than anyone we've ever had as the second best scorer to Joel, including Jimmy when he was here and averaging 17 a game, and including James Harden when he was here, when he was, more about averaging 10, 11 assists and averaging 19, 20 points. I just think, and again, it goes back to, we have to add a guy who can score, but if Tyrese Maxey can take that offensive half-court level up even just a little bit in the playoffs, I think that little bit goes a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are going to truly see what this guy is made of when the bright lights come on. We have seen nothing to indicate that he won't rise to the occasion. In fact, we have plenty of proof why that will be the case based on every single opportunity, every single question he has answered with flying colors thus far. And I cannot wait to see him step up when the moment matters most. And one of the teams that I kind of looked at as a significant hurdle for most of this was the Milwaukee Bucks. And after today's events, I'm feeling much more confident in the Sixers' ability to clear that. So we'll start off with just, Mark, what was your initial reaction when you see that they fired Adrian Griffin at this point in the season?
So I actually wasn't as surprised as you would feel like you normally would be, because it feels like there's been weird comments to the media, like even like a week in, Griffin was like, yeah, I need to trust.
Little frozen from Mark right here. Should be popping right back.
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't hotel Wi-Fi. But yeah, I even the first week he was the Bucks head coach, he kind of had a thing where he came out and said like, yeah, my players just, I need my players to come to me with more of where they like the ball and what plays they want to run and what will help them. And it's like, dude, you're the head coach. You were like, I don't know. I thought that was like a crazy way to handle it. And then, it seems like Giannis has had some weird quotes where he's kind of not backed his coach. And you would have
Mm,
to think if this decision was made, Giannis was a part of it. Um,
absolutely.
so I think that there's some behind the scenes stuff going on. I think there was a lack of belief in him as a leader, as a coach. He went from Budenholzer, and I've never been the biggest Coach Bud guy, but he's a very competent NBA coach. I imagine he's probably very prepared. He's probably very schematic and exact in how he wants to do things. And Adrian Griffin, it felt like he was like, "All right, guys, like just go play, like go play
Yeah.
offense, like Damon Giannis." Like I don't know. And by the way, I think they probably would have been better off just keeping him if they are going to hire Mr. Rivers.
Yeah, and that was the most shocking part to me. So I was surprised just to see Adrian Griffin get fired, just because very short leash clearly, and I thought they would at least give him the season. The results were not strong, even though the record looks promising. Like that team should be better than they are, and the defensive numbers are specifically what have frustrated me. There's obviously going to be a step back when you go from Drew Holiday, Dame Lillard as your primary guard defender. But to see a team with Giannis and Brook Lopez on it, ranking in like the bottom 10 percentile on a ton of metrics, just should not happen. And there's some real issues with that in the schemes, the coverage, whatever it may be. That can't happen. That's pretty inexcusable, and something that, if that carried into the playoffs, would be something that absolutely got you bounced out of the playoffs. So I understand trying to address it now, but within like an hour, probably even less than that, within like 20 minutes of this initial report, reports immediately coming out that Bucks are targeting Doc Rivers as the potential replacement to step in as the Milwaukee Bucks head coach. So after that, what was your initial reaction to that one?
So my initial reaction was, oh, so the Sixers are going to make it to the conference finals this year. That was my initial reaction. To be quite honest with you, I think we're on a collision course with the Milwaukee Bucks to play in the second round. It seems pretty obvious the Celtics don't lose basketball games, so that kind of hurts them having a chance to even lose that one seed. And even if someone got hurt, I feel like they'd probably keep that one seed. Like I just think at this point, Boston is going to be the one. Milwaukee and Philly, in whatever way, are going to be the 2 and the 3. Please, I beg you, Milwaukee, to give us an opportunity to have Nick Nurse coach against Doc Rivers in a playoff series. It's
absolutely.
I will mortgage my house that I don't own to bet on the Sixers series line in that series. There is no scenario where Doc Rivers is beating Nick Nurse in a playoff series when the talent is relatively equal. It's just not going to happen. The fact that Milwaukee already had him, I think that has to be a part of it. I know he interviewed with them in the offseason. Maybe that was always Giannis's preferred guy. I don't know why that would be. But maybe that was the case. And Giannis kind of held it over the organization's head. And every time there was ever a problem, he said, go get Doc. He's, calling basketball games. You can get him right now. Like, I guess he got to them. I just have a hard time believing this is coming from anyone but Giannis.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's pretty spot on. Like it has to be. It has to be to think that make this type of decision. And I'm sure there'll be some leaked reports. And one of the more interesting ones that came in the initial Shams report was that Doc Rivers had kind of been a piece of the advisor for Adrian Griffin there, which some dirty water there, if that is the case, which seems to be for stepping in. But I could not be more thrilled from the Sixers perspective to see this as the case. And think about if the Sixers' path to a potential NBA Finals is through Jimmy Butler, through Doc Rivers, and through Al Horford, man. Like there's a real chance that ends up something. If the Heat get the 7 seed, that goes Miami Heat, then Milwaukee Bucks, then Boston Celtics. That's not an easy path by any means, but boy, would that feel good if that is the way that it's done. But yeah, my level of optimism for these Sixers and Bucks, it is weird that the Sixers have kind of avoided the Bucks throughout this era of basketball, that there has not been like this throwdown 7-game series between Milwaukee and Philadelphia. Feels like it's destined to happen, and it would be all the sweeter if Doc Rivers is the guy for sure.
Yeah, and I know Trill, again, to give him another shout out, but Trill Bro Dude had the tweet about how the players that Doc has coached in recent years. And it's just, I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of talent he's wasted. If Doc gets this job, he will have coached Chris Paul, James Harden, Joel Embiid, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Dame Lillard, Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Tracy McGrady, and Blake Griffin, all in or near their prime. That's not mentioning the fact, by the way, that he was playing George Hill over Tyrese Maxey, who's now a top 20 player in the NBA. That's also not mentioning the fact that he was playing Avery Bradley over Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in the playoffs, who might be the MVP this year if Joel misses enough games. So, I mean, I don't know how anyone could look at Doc Rivers' resume and say that he's done anything but fail.
Yeah.
The way that I always put this into perspective, Doc Rivers gets all of this leash across the NBA for one championship. That championship happened before the Phillies won the 2008 World Series. It was 6 months before. Think about how long ago it was when the Phillies won the World Series. We had like 4 more playoff years after that, and then like a 10-year drought, and have now made the playoffs twice since it. Like,
yeah,
it is so long ago. It was 16 years ago. And that's what that guy's holding on to. That's why he got the Lob City job, a prime real estate job in one of the best, media markets in the country, LA, where everyone wants to play. You have an incredible ready-made team right there for you. And then after you squander that team, you get Kawhi and Paul George and you squander that team. And then you go to Philly and you have Joel Embiid and you squander MVP years from Joel Embiid. And now you're going to get hired to coach maybe a guy who's on the trajectory to be a top 10 to 15 player of all time in Giannis Antetokounmpo. He's got 2 MVPs. He's got a finals MVP, and he's going to stunt his legacy and career. Yeah. It is unbelievable the high level spots that he has failed in.
And that's insane to put it all like that. And so also true just to lay it out like that. It's amazing to me, like the frustrating part about Doc Rivers from my end that we kind of saw throughout his era in Philadelphia here is, what is his defining trait as a head coach? What is the thing that makes him good? Because it's not the X's and O's. Yeah. Go faster.
Go,
Come on, guys.
Go.
Come on. Yeah. But it's not the X's and O's. It's on neither side of the ball. But it's like night and day different under Nick Nurse. The different just sets they're running, the ATOs, on both sides of the floor. Defensively, I've been honestly even more impressed with the Sixers this year. They switch up like formations or styles every single time out. And that's just ridiculous stuff. Things we never saw under Doc. And then, like, the real calling card is him as, like, a leader or him as, like, the Mr. Accountability. But then you think back to the Ben Simmons situation and the James Harden situation here in Philadelphia were both under Doc's watch. Like, he played a significant role in each of those, with Ben more so him carrying the blame, with him obviously questioning or not refusing to answer if he believes he could be a championship point guard. Not that the relationships weren't already soured then, but to see him kind of put the straw that broke the camel's back in that one, that was absolutely Doc Rivers there. So then to kind of throw him onto this Bucks team, like, I can't believe this is real. I can't believe it's actually happening. And I can't believe anybody who has watched the recent just performance of Doc Rivers led team is bought in as like, that is the missing piece for this championship puzzle.
I think it's Giannis. I really do think that it's Giannis who thinks it's the missing piece to the championship puzzle. It's not to mention, by the way, we now know, because I mean, we always knew this, but Tyrese Maxey now said it on a podcast. Like, last year when he benched Tyrese Maxey and put him in the 6th man, he blatantly lied through his teeth to the media and said Maxey asked for it. And by the way, he did that so we could start DeAnthony Melton and George Niang. Like, think about how insane that is. Like, Tyrese Maxey is a top 20 player in the league right now. And Doc's going on pods, oh, I mean, this kid's special. I've always loved this kid. And it's like, you were putting him in the dunker spot in the rookie year. I can't stand Doc Rivers. And I'd like to thank Luke Arcaney for making me the little slideshow that I asked for on Twitter, the He's Done Miracles on Me slideshow with pictures of Glenn Rivers. I mean, I would just like to thank Doc Rivers and the Milwaukee Bucks for the Sixers making their first Eastern Conference final since 2001.
Absolutely. And Doc, I will say, like, I can't believe this is true, but he did annoy me more hearing him on the call than as the actual Sixers coach. So in that regard, I am grateful that he will be coaching. I guess in a lot of regards, I'm grateful that he's going to be coaching the Bucks. And he does have a way for taking none of the blame but all the credit. Even with Shea talking about, like, on the Bill Simmons podcast, how I always knew Shea was going to be the special. It's like, you didn't play him, dude. Him. Yeah, you traded him. And same with Maxey. Like, if it wasn't the Ben Simmons situation, which once again Doc Rivers played a part in causing, like, we might not have ever seen Tyrese Maxey be this level of player or see that type of opportunity. That we would have, like, scratch and claw him to get a chance. So amazing. I'm so happy that this is the way that things have shaken out. I think this is probably the best possible way the past 24 hours in the Sixers world could have possibly gone, with the Joel Embiid 70 points, then Doc Rivers getting hired by the Bucks. I don't think it gets much better than this.
The thing I always point to with Doc Rivers in Game 5, one of the worst days of my life, against the Atlanta Hawks. when they blew the 28-point lead. I don't know if people know my backstory. I had a viral tweet about that. My girlfriend, now fiance, had never seen a Philadelphia sports loss. She was 28-0 at the time. We had figured it out with StubHub and looked at all these Sixers tickets, figured out all the games. And she said it, and I didn't believe her. I tweeted it a couple times before that, at 23, didn't really get, a crazy amount of buzz. No one really cared. And then once it got to 26, people cared. And then we got sent to a game. We went to a game. It was a really cool thing. The last game, game 5 against the Atlanta Hawks, we were going to go on SportsCenter live that night. We were DM'd by ESPN, and they DM'd us at halftime and said, hey, we're going to get in touch with the Sixers, and we're going to have you come to the court, and you and your girlfriend are going to get interviewed on the court live on SportsCenter. And the Sixers blow a 28-point lead. They did not play Tyrese Maxey in that game. The next game, in game 6, Tyrese Maxey saved us. I don't know if people remember that because we just lost game 7. We won game 6, and it was because Maxey came in and immediately gave us energy and saved us. The next game, in game 7, Doc immediately took the ball out of his hands and didn't play him until the end of the second quarter. It's just, he has no thought process as to what he's doing. I always go back to the same year. It was so evident to everyone who had a basketball reference, an ability to go on Basketball Reference, that Ben Simmons, Matisse Thybulle, and Dwight Howard could not be on the court together. It was a travesty every time. They had the worst net rating of any 3-man lineup in the league. And Doc would come out after playing it and after it going poorly. He would come out in a post-game presser and be like, I'm sorry, guys, I won't do it again. I see the data, I won't do it. And then he would do it the next game. He's just not, he's focused on golf. The guy is not focused on winning. And hey, there's good golf courses up in Sheboygan, up in Wisconsin, so he can enjoy himself.
Yeah, hopefully. But I can't be more content sitting here from the Sixers side of things on how this went. So shout out to Joel Embiid for keeping the I guess optimism of the entire Sixers franchise, just carrying it on his shoulders the way he has for the past decade, and for continuing for that to be the case. For Doc Rivers to really, I feel slam this championship window closed for the Milwaukee Bucks and pry it open for the Philadelphia 76ers. Shout out to Jeremy jumping in. We'll be back on Saturday with him. But aside from the Tough Cover radio show, which we'll be on 11 to 1 on Saturday, both you and me, with Jeremy in studio as well, what else you got going, Mark? I know we got the Chalk Talk with Shane Half over on Bleeding Green Radio. What else you got going on?
Yeah, Chalk Talk. We do Chalk Talk. We also are me, him, and Dibes, Mr. Crockpot. We're doing BGN Draft Pod. We've been doing it all year. Now it changes a little bit. Now that we're officially in draft season, we're starting our positional rankings. Top 5 quarterbacks come out tomorrow, so that'll be a fun little pod to do. Also, I not to be remiss, I can't believe I didn't bring this up to lead off the show. Brett Brown being in the building last night.
The Ferk and Covington, that little huddle at the end. Touch the heartstrings.
I'm not crying. You're crying, Sean Barnard. I was feeling things last night, watching Cub smile. He's had some issues here, and apparently his knee is a little bit worse than people thought. Joel and Ferk in there. Yeah, it's absolutely sucks. He'd be useful on his team. But seeing those three with Brett and seeing Joel say, "Oh, I finally passed the ball," and it's on a night he scored 70. It's just I so hope that Brett Brown takes over the Spurs after Pop retires, and Joel can win his title this year, and then Brett Brown can win all the titles he wants in San Antonio. Nothing would make me happier.
Yeah, nothing but love for Brett Brown, absolutely. And it was cool to see Joel kind of paying homage, talking to him after the game. They both had a couple comments about each of them, and he was a huge part in the growth of Joel Embiid. That it's not easy to, it's insane to think Joel has played more basketball at the NBA level than he played beforehand. Just think about that on the grand scheme of him learning the game, learning the sport of basketball, the intricacies, all those things. And Brett Brown took him along in a cool way there. So that was an awesome moment at the end. And yeah, last night was an all-time moment in a lot of directions, in a lot of ways. It did make it all the better that Brett Brown was a part of it. So great shout out, making sure that we mentioned that there.
Yeah, and it's nothing like it. 3 years of Doc Rivers will make you appreciate Brett Brown. And I always loved Brett Brown, but Brett Brown was a great person. Maybe he was an average coach, and maybe he wasn't good enough to get us over the hump. I think it was probably more of a roster issue. Doc Rivers, in my opinion, is I think he's a scumbag, to be quite honest. I was not sure what word to use there. I think he's a bad person. The way he talked to Austin Krell and asked, Would you ask Pop that question?
Yeah.
Things like that. I just think he's a bad guy. And I think he's a bad coach. So Brett Brown, you get far too much crap. You got far too much crap back then. Everyone should redirect. And even last night, it's like, oh, Brett Brown. Some people were making jokes like that. It's like, if you don't think he's happy seeing that, like, you're an idiot. But whatever.
Yeah.
Brett Brown, I love you, buddy.
And it was cool him staying in Philly, watching his son play for a little bit. His son playing over at Penn. His son's a hooper, by the way. I got a chance to watch him in high school. Real deal. So shout out to Sam as well, Sam Brown over there. But we'll wrap things up here. I did want to make sure that we jumped on, got fired up about the Sixers a little bit. An all-time game, all-time moment that will go down the history books by Joel, and some breaking news around the NBA. So appreciate everyone that is tuning in and watching this. Make sure you check back on Saturday from 11 to 1 to catch me and Mark chopping it up about everything else in the sports world. Got some big NFL games this weekend and everything else, so make sure you tune in for that. Make sure you're smashing the subscribe right here on Pick Swap Media. We'll be talking with you next time. Trust the process, as always.